Welcome to the 1920s, and welcome to my 1920s series, Butterflies Fly Free. My series is about women, flappers, in the 1920s, and each book is about a different flapper. Book 1 in the series, Trapping the Butterfly, is about Bethany, and Bethany is 17 turning 18. She'll be celebrating her birthday in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Now, Hot Springs, Arkansas was a town where the gangsters went on vacation and laid their guns down to have a good time. The mayor had some dealings with gangsters. It was definitely a gangster's town and a gangster's playground. That's a story in and of itself, which I might tell in a different book one day. Today we're focusing on the flappers. Now in Hot Springs, Arkansas, the Arlington Hotel was the place to stay. Al Capone would rent out the 4th floor, the whole floor. And in doing my research for this book, I contacted the Arlington and inquired as to which dates Mr. Capone would have stayed there. They can neither confirm or deny any dates when Al Capone stayed there. Well, of course, he probably wasn't even on the books. Or if he ever was, they would have gotten changed or some such thing. But I just was tickled by that. I also was in contact with a woman who worked for the National Park Service who helped me with the historical details of Hot Springs and the buildings there at that time. And my thanks is to Melissa and everyone else who helped with the writing of this book. I went to Hot Springs and stayed at the Arlington myself and took the baths and did some great research there. Now the song that we were listening to was I've Got a Feeling I'm Falling, and it's an instrumental from 1920. So I was playing you a little bit of the music from that time. And now I'm going to move on and start with the first chapter of Trapping the Butterfly, because this video is a part of the series of First Chapter Reads by myself, author Debra Parmley. I'll also say that I have book 2, which follows this one, which is Dancing Butterfly, and book 2 is Suki's story. So let's begin. Just have to get to the page. All right. Chapter 1, August 1926. Bethany Robinson did not need yet another lecture on being appreciative. Thank you, Aunt Margaret. She accepted the gold-trimmed white china plate her aunt handed her while clearing her throat to disguise the grumbling of her stomach. Placing the plate in front of her on the table, she waited and tried not to look at the food placed upon it. At the head of the table, Uncle James cut a large bite of chicken and popped it into his mouth without waiting for anyone. Aunt Margaret said nothing, but straightened her fork with that look upon her face, her lips puckering like a prune. She straightened the fork again, showing her blue veins and the bones beneath her thin, pale skin. Aunt Margaret was in a mood, and she obviously wasn't going to say grace. So it would be one of those kind of meals. If only Bethany could have eaten in the kitchen with Cook, as she'd been allowed to when she was younger. She glanced down at her chicken, wondering if it was safe to eat a bite, or if that would draw her aunt's attention and sour mood. Perhaps it would be best to wait. The tension in the room gathered closer, and the more she could distance herself from that, the better. Her stomach rumbled again. "Margaret," Uncle James said, "please eat something." Her aunt, a small bird-like woman who barely ate enough to keep a bird alive, said, "I couldn't eat a bite." Such a predictable old refrain. "Not a thing," Aunt Margaret sighed. "You go on, dear. Take it." She held out her plate to him, looking away from it as if the food offended her. "I simply can't." Bethany would have loved for her aunt to have offered her the savory chicken she'd passed over to Uncle James. But she said nothing, and instead cut her own portion into small pieces and ate one slow bite so as not to draw attention to herself. Having an entire breast of chicken all for herself just once would be nice. Her aunt always cut the chicken breasts in half. One might fill her up, if anything could. Bethany suspected Aunt Margaret counted how many bites Bethany took. Though counting bites was something Bethany did too, it was different when she did it. 4 more bites, see? Out of 5. If she chewed them slowly enough, she might feel full faster. Strange how that sometimes worked, that and drinking lots of water. Though not today, not the way Aunt Margaret stared at her with that look, her brown eyes darkening like storm clouds gathering. Thump. "Enough!" Uncle James thumped his fist on the table again, his fork still in his hand. Both women turned to him in surprise. "Enough! I am taking you to Hot Springs National Park for the baths, and you will not argue with me." Bethany raised one eyebrow. He wasn't talking to her. She never argued with Uncle James. What was he talking about? What did he mean by enough? "One likes to be asked." Aunt Margaret sniffed, and her facial expression turned haughty. "There is no need to speak to a lady in that tone, Mr. Robinson." "Mrs. Robinson, I am asking you to travel with me to the medicinal springs to partake of the baths and healing properties of the waters." His tone brooked no argument and said just as clearly that he was not asking, but telling. "I will think about it." Uncle James, knowing as well as Bethany did that the phrase Aunt Margaret had just used meant no, then changed his tone and approach. "I am asking out of concern for you, dear. Your health is no better and seems to be getting worse." "I have done everything the doctor asked." "Yes, and now we are going to try a new doctor, one who has had success with women in your condition." What exactly was that condition? They always referred to it as one of Aunt Margaret's spells. Maybe this new doctor would finally have a name for it. "The trip will do you good, and I have a meeting with Mr. Rivaldi after we arrive." "About the merger we've been discussing." She glanced over at Bethany, then back again. "Yes, he is amiable." "Well, then," Aunt Margaret sniffed, "we shall all go to Hot Springs and take the baths." She shot a pointed glance at Bethany. Bethany placed her hands in her lap and folded her fingers together. "When are we going?" "Next week," Uncle James said. "We'll take a 2-week holiday." He nodded at his wife again. "That should be long enough." Aunt Margaret nodded in agreement. Would 2 weeks be long enough to cure her aunt? That didn't seem like very long. Oh, but if we're gone that long. "That means we'll be away on my birthday." Bethany blurted out and then stopped herself from saying more. This would be her 18th birthday. She'd moved from counting down the months to counting the weeks left. Soon she would be of age and no longer under Aunt Margaret's thumb. We'll celebrate your birthday in Hot Springs. That will make it a very memorable trip. Aunt Margaret smiled a secretive smile. That smile would have made Bethany nervous had they not been discussing her birthday. Just a week left to plan before they left for Hot Springs, Arkansas. Bethany would have to change her original idea, but she would still go through with it. Nothing short of illness or death would stop her from carrying out her plan. Being in Hot Springs might even make it easier. Bethany had never been inside the train station before. She peered out beneath her wide-brimmed hat as she looked about, taking in the sights and sounds around her. Her aunt resembled a crow in a tailored black worsted jersey suit, gray hat, and black shoes, as she darted her gaze about the station, looking for an open space on one of the wooden benches. Not for the first time, Bethany noticed how old-fashioned her aunt appeared in the skirt that came nearly to her ankles. The suit was at least 5 years old, and her aunt wouldn't replace it until it wore out. Despite the fact Mr. Robinson owned his own company and moved among the wealthier members of society, his frugal wife stretched every penny and clung to the older fashions. Most of the women bustling about the station wore newer fashions and shorter skirts. Bethany glanced down at her own navy blue georgette crepe frock, which fell well below the knee. The long lacy collar, the only pretty thing she liked about it. At least with her wide-brimmed hat, she could duck her head and hide when she wanted to. Oh, what she wouldn't give to wear one of those shorter, dropped-waist dresses with a cloche hat and bobbed hair, to look like other girls her age and to go dancing with boys. She couldn't wait for the day when she could pick out her own clothes and go when and where she wanted. Soon she would be 18 and would be able to use her inheritance, she hoped. Uncle James had always been vague about the terms of the will and the monies her parents had left behind her for her. "Come along," Aunt Margaret said, interrupting her thoughts. "We will sit and wait for your uncle." "Yes, ma'am." Bethany followed her aunt, who noticed an open spot on one of the benches and strode toward it, determined to claim it for her own. People moved away from her when she was in that mood, and held that look upon her face. Her aunt, tiny as she was, could be a formidable woman. Soon she and Bethany sat together on a high-backed wooden bench. People bustled around the train station, many carrying newspapers and reading the headlines as they walked. Everyone else appeared to be reading the paper. Something must have happened. A long line of passengers stretched around the newspaper stand, and more joined the line as soon as it started to shorten. Whatever had happened must have been awful. Women cried, and men shook their heads and looked mournful. Bethany strained to see a newspaper held by a man nearby. The headline read, "Rudolph Valentino dead, August 23rd, 1926. Sudden death at the age of 31. Oh no, he couldn't be dead. He just had an operation a week ago. His latest movie had just come out and he'd gone to New York to promote it. He was too young to be dead. So young and handsome. How could Rudolph Valentino be dead? A tear formed in the corner of Bethany's eye. Uncle James sat down next to her, and she asked, Uncle James, are you going to buy a newspaper? What for? He frowned. Uncle James read the business news and kept up daily with Wall Street, but rarely followed stories unless they were about money or politics. To read about what happened to Rudolph Valentino. You want to read about the death of some movie star? Uncle James directed his frown at her. Well, yes, everyone is mourning him. Can't you see? He must have been a drinker, Aunt Margaret said. That's what happens to wild young men who drink. Hollywood types, Uncle James said with disdain. They all drink. The women, too. It's disgraceful. Aunt Margaret nodded. Both she and Uncle James were in favor of prohibition and looked down on lawbreakers. Aunt Margaret always pointed out how all the good churches now served grape juice in place of communion wine. No, there's nothing in that paper I wish to read. Uncle James pulled out his pocket watch to look at it, signaling the discussion was closed. Young women today, Aunt Margaret paused and let the word trail away. I simply don't understand them. The dark-haired flapper who'd drawn Aunt Margaret's attention walked by, cigarette holder in hand, as if on cue to emphasize Aunt Margaret's point. Drinking, smoking, running wild, Aunt Margaret tisked, then sniffed and turned her head away from the flapper, dismissing the thin, vivacious girl who was now talking with friends. Ignoring Aunt Margaret, Bethany fingered her clutch purse. She'd saved for months to collect the money inside it. Though she yearned for a newspaper, she knew that if she bought one, it meant dipping into her fund. Best not to dip into it for anything, or her plan might fail. I blame the parents, Aunt Margaret said. You are a fortunate young lady. Why, if we hadn't taken you in, who knows what might have happened to you? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. The words slipped out automatically, the pattern long established from 10 years of similar conversations. Bethany looked about the room, taking in that her aunt and uncle seemed to be the only people in the train station uninterested in the death of Rudolph Valentino. Was the whole world mourning his death? Everyone except, perhaps, Aunt Margaret and Uncle James. At least here Bethany didn't feel so all alone, as if no one understood her or her feelings, as if no one felt the way she did, and that she had something wrong with her. Here she felt more normal. Maybe someone would leave a newspaper when they were done, and she could pick it up and read their copy. Unfortunately, the train arrived before that happened, and the conductor called, "All aboard." A movie poster beside the door where they went out to board the train advertised Valentino's final movie. It read, Rudolph Valentino stars with Vilma Banky in The Son of the Sheik, from the novel by E.M. Hull. How romantic! What an adventure a trip to a foreign land would be, to have a sheik fall in love with you and sweep you away. Bethany sighed. Oh, how she wanted to see the movie. Everyone had been talking about it since it had premiered in California in July. Then the promotional tour had taken the stars across the country, and Rudolph Valentino had ended up in New York having his operation. Now he was dead. Bethany might never have a chance to see one of his movies. She sat on the train in their private compartment in the window seat, looking out at the world and wondering when, where, and how she would ever find her place in it. Some place where she fit in, and where at least one person understood her. She wanted to see The Son of the Sheik so badly. The movie was supposed to open next week at home, any day now, and everyone would see it but her. Once again, she would miss out. She missed out on everything. She stared out the window at the scenery. The whole world was passing her by, and right now she was powerless to do anything about it. They rode the Rock Island Railroad into Hot Springs, Arkansas, and then took a taxi to the Arlington Hotel. With 2 towers on top and an American flag flying in the middle, the hotel sat at the end of famous Bathhouse Row and soared impressively over all the other buildings. Bethany counted at least 9 floors with windows, not counting the towers. Their taxi let them off out front, and the taxi driver unloaded their bags for the bellman to take in. Uncle James walked up to the reception desk to check them in, while Bethany waited with Aunt Margaret. "It's beautiful," Bethany said. Inside the lobby, 2 murals adorned the walls, one behind the bar on the right side of the room, and the other behind the bandstand on the left side. Her aunt glanced about, sniffed, and said, "I hope our rooms are suitable. One never knows with a hotel." Bethany had no frame of reference with which to compare this hotel, since she'd never been inside one before, so she remained silent and enjoyed all the new sights and sounds. Once they finished checking in, they followed the bellman to the elevator and then accompanied him up to their rooms on the 5th floor, where he unlocked both doors. They stepped inside, and he placed their bags in their respective rooms. Bethany hurried to the window in her room and looked out. She had an excellent view of Bathhouse Row and was high enough up to see quite far. The room was small but lovely, and she had it all to herself. Though her aunt and uncle would be right next door, she was happy to have the privacy. She'd be able to lock the door so no one could walk in on her, not even her aunt. "You have an hour to unpack and freshen up, and then we'll go down to the Venetian dining room for dinner," Uncle James said. "Be ready." "Yes, sir." Bethany waited until he left before spinning in a circle with her arms out and laughing. She was here inside this elegant room in Hot Springs where her life would change forever. She could hardly wait. And that is the end of chapter 1. And now I'll read you a short blurb about the story. Trapping the Butterfly is book 1 in Debra Parmley's Butterflies Fly Free series about flappers and gangsters in the 1920s. Each book focuses on a different flapper. Hot Springs, Arkansas in the 1920s is where the wealthy go to take the baths for medicinal purposes, and where gangsters lay down their Tommy guns while on vacation. Bethany and her aunt and uncle have gone to take the baths, hoping to cure her aunt of her illness. Bethany, excited to be celebrating her 18th birthday at the Arlington Hotel, can't wait to cut her long hair into a bob and to raise her hemline and learn to do the Charleston. Her life has been controlled from the clothes she wears to the food she eats, as her aunt and uncle have kept her and her inheritance very close. If her aunt and uncle have their way, she will return engaged to his new business partner. Little does she know, Al Capone has rented the entire 4th floor of the Arlington, where she is staying with her family, and Suki, the flapper who befriends her, is one of the gang's molls. One of Al's men is quite taken with Bethany and wants to make her his girl. Detective Paul Tulloch chased butterflies when he was young. Now he chases gangsters. His job plunges him into the harsh underworld of gangsters, bootleggers, and fast women. He's captivated by the sight of innocent Bethany sitting in the park surrounded by butterflies. He hopes she will be his girl. But two other men have determined to catch her, and one is a dangerous gangster who is part of Al Capone's gang. Will Bethany exit her cocoon and then find strength to fly free, or will she be trapped by one of these men? Coming of age in the 1920s is not so easy as it might appear, especially for a young, naive girl who has been sheltered. And here is Trapping the Butterfly. Trapping the Butterfly is available in ebook, in print, and also in audiobook. And you can buy it where books are sold. Thank you for listening. When I am completed with writing Dancing Butterfly, which is book 2, it comes out this month in March 2018, I will be doing a first chapter read, but I won't be doing that until it comes out both in ebook and in print, and of course everything there is finished, because getting the books out to you is the most important thing. And I want to thank you for listening and invite you to subscribe to my channel for more first chapter reads and also a few author chats by this author. Thank you.